All right, let's talk about one of history's greatest puzzles. It's this idea that a super sophisticated, advanced civilization could have existed during the last ice age, only to be completely wiped off the face of the Earth. Is that just science fiction? Or are we missing a massive, massive chapter of the human story? Let's dig in. Okay, so this timeline really lays out the core of the mystery for us. We know that anatomically modern humans, that's people with brains just like you and me, we've been around for over 300,000 years. But the history books tell us that complex civilizations, with cities and writing and large-scale agriculture, they only really show up in the last 6,000 years or so. I mean, that is a tiny, tiny sliver of our time on this planet.
And well, that's the big question, right? If we had the hardware, the brain power, the raw potential for all that time, what were we doing? Why did it take almost 300,000 years for us to get the ball rolling on civilization as we know it?
Well, this is where a really fascinating and, pretty controversial theory comes in. It suggests that maybe we're not looking at a long, slow start at all. Maybe we're looking at a story with a huge chapter just ripped out of the middle.
This is the idea that authors like Graham Hancock have been exploring for decades. The argument goes something like this. What if it didn't take so long? What if an advanced civilization did rise during the Ice Age, a culture that had mastered things like astronomy and global navigation? But then, some kind of global catastrophe just erased them, leaving us with only the faintest whispers of their existence.
So where's the proof? Well, the first place proponents tell you to look isn't buried in the ground, it's buried in our stories. Specifically, in the hundreds and hundreds of myths about a great, world-ending flood that you can find in cultures all over the globe.
The thinking here is that these stories aren't just a bunch of weird coincidences. No, they're fragmented memories, they're echoes, passed down through countless generations by the traumatized survivors of a very real, very global disaster that literally put their world underwater.
But what's really fascinating when you look closer is the sheer variety here. I mean, sure, a lot of them have common themes, like divine anger and somebody surviving on an ark, but others are just wildly different. You've got the Greek myth, where Zeus repopulates the earth by having a couple throw stones over their shoulders. Or my favorite, an Aboriginal story where the flood is caused by a giant frog laughing so hard he spits out all the water in the world. So these differences, they're just as important as the similarities.
Okay, so we've got the stories, but what about physical stuff? Well, beyond the myths, the theory points to actual artifacts and structures that seem impossibly advanced for their time, almost like technological ghosts from some forgotten age.
Now, a key piece of evidence you'll always hear about is the Peary Race map, drawn in 1513. Proponents, starting way back with Professor Charles Hapgood, argue that the bottom part of this map is an incredibly accurate depiction of the coast of Antarctica, but without its mile-thick ice sheet. Now that's something that would have been totally impossible for 16th century sailors to map, which suggests it must have been copied from a much, much older source map.
And the map isn't the only puzzle piece. Then you've got Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, this stunningly complex temple built by people who were supposedly just simple hunter-gatherers. There's also evidence that many ancient cultures somehow had this deep understanding of precession of the equinoxes. That's the slow 26,000-year wobble of the Earth's axis. And of course, there's the famous theory that the Giza pyramids are aligned to the stars of Orion's belt, but not as they looked for the pharaohs, as they looked back around 10,500 BCE. So if there was a lost civilization, what killed it? The theory needs a murder weapon. And the prime suspect is a period called the Younger Dryas. Now, this was not some slow, gradual climate change. This was a violent, chaotic period of planetary upheaval. The hypothesis is that fragments of a comet slammed into the Earth, which triggered a sudden deep freeze, destabilized the massive ice caps, and caused the catastrophic global floods that are remembered in all those ancient myths. Okay, so that's the alternative theory in a nutshell. And you have to admit, it's a compelling story. But now, let's switch gears and look at it from the mainstream archaeological perspective. For archaeologists, the most important word when looking at all this evidence is context. This fantastic analogy from a historian on Reddit just sums up the critique perfectly. Science isn't about cherry-picking a few anomalies that don't seem to fit. It's about looking at the entire data set, all the puzzle pieces, and seeing what kind of cohesive picture they actually build when you put them all together. So putting that context back in can completely reframe the evidence. Let's take the Peary-Rees map again. Archaeologists and map historians, they don't see Antarctica. They see Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. See, it was a really common practice for map makers back then to just draw a giant hypothetical continent at the bottom of the world, and they would often attach any real places they found, like the coast of South America, right onto it.
And when you look at it this way, the other clues start to change too. Those hundreds of flood myths, well, they're much more likely born from the universal human experience of living near water, suffering local river floods, or tsunamis, or hurricanes. And Göbekli Tepe? It's not a gift from some lost golden age. It's incredible proof that hunter-gatherers were far more capable and organized than we ever gave them credit for. And maybe the biggest question, where's the rest of the evidence? An advanced, industrial-level civilization would leave traces, like lead pollution from mining in ancient ice cores, and we just don't find it.
Look, the goal here isn't to declare a winner in this debate. It's really to understand the profound challenge of trying to piece together our distant past, and to acknowledge that there are things we know for a fact have been lost forever. Here's something everyone agrees on. The end of the Ice Age was not a gentle process. As those massive glaciers melted, sea levels rose dramatically, by nearly 400 feet. They swallowed up vast coastal plains where our ancestors definitely would have lived and hunted and built their communities. There are entire landscapes from our deep past that are now sitting under hundreds of feet of water. And this isn't just some ancient problem, it's a deeply human one. Think about it. Today, about 40% of the entire world's population lives near a coast. It's incredibly likely our ancestors did the exact same thing. The best real estate has always been by the sea. It's rich with resources. And that is precisely the real estate that is now lost to history. And so that leaves us with a final, kind of provocative thought. Whether an advanced civilization was lost or not, we know for a fact that entire chapters of the human story are sitting at the bottom of the ocean. And it forces us to look at our own world, at our own changing coastlines, and ask a really serious question. What parts of our story, what cities, what knowledge, will be the unsolved mysteries for the archaeologists of the future?